Zach Wilson's rise to NFL prominence began at Brigham Young University, BYU, where his junior year turned heads across the nation. Wilson's 2020 season was nothing short of spectacular, leading BYU to an impressive 11-1 record. His ability to read defenses, throw pinpoint passes, and extend plays with his legs made him one of the most exciting quarterbacks in college football. But it wasn't just his physical tools that stood out. Wilson's poise under pressure, combined with his confidence to make big plays in critical moments, earned him national recognition. His football IQ, quick release, and ability to throw on the run set him apart from many college quarterbacks that year. During his junior season, Wilson threw for over 3,600 yards and 33 touchdowns, breaking school records and putting BYU back in the national spotlight. His deep ball accuracy was one of the best in the country, and his ability to orchestrate BYU's offense with precision caught the attention of NFL scouts. Wilson's pro day performance further solidified his status as a top prospect. In front of scouts from almost every NFL team, Wilson's throws on the run, arm strength, and overall composure were on full display. One throw in particular, a 50-yard bomb while rolling to his left NFL executives and media members buzzing. NFL analysts were quick to make bold predictions about Wilson's future, with some even comparing him to NFL legends like Patrick Mahomes and Aaron Rodgers due to his improvisational skills and ability to make off-platform throws. He had all the traits teams look for in a modern quarterback: mobility, accuracy, and the ability to create something out of nothing. With his stock skyrocketing, it was clear that Wilson would be one of the first quarterbacks off the board in the 2021 NFL Draft. The question wasn't whether he would be drafted in the first round, it was how high. As the draft approached, the hype surrounding Wilson continued to build. The New York Jets, who held the second overall pick, were in desperate need of a franchise quarterback after years of instability at the position. Wilson, with his cannon arm and leadership qualities, seemed like the perfect fit for a team looking to rebuild. The Jets hadn't had a truly dominant quarterback since the days of Joe Namath, and many believed Wilson could finally be the answer to their decades-long search. His pro day had only solidified their belief that he was the right man for the job. The Jets were captivated by Wilson's potential, seeing him as the dynamic playmaker who could finally change the course of their franchise. New York had long been searching for a quarterback who could make all the throws, extend plays, and carry the offense on his shoulders. For Wilson, being selected by the Jets would mean stepping into one of the toughest markets in sports. But for the Jets, it meant hope. After years of missed opportunities and failed draft picks, the team and its fan base were ready to believe that Wilson could be their savior. The 2021 NFL Draft arrived, and the Jets made it official: Zach Wilson was the second overall pick, their new franchise quarterback. Fans celebrated the selection, hoping Wilson would bring a much-needed spark to the struggling organization. His talent was undeniable, and the anticipation for his rookie season was immense. But with great expectations came enormous pressure. The New York media, known for being unforgiving, was ready to dissect every move Wilson made. The question now was whether he could live up to the hype that had been built around him. Wilson's journey from BYU star to the NFL's second overall pick was a dream come true. His college career had set the stage for what many believed would be a successful transition to the NFL. But as the season approached, the reality of being a rookie quarterback in the NFL's biggest market began to set in. Would Wilson's college success translate to the pros, or would the weight of expectations prove too much? Only time would tell, but for now, the Jets and their fans were optimistic about their new quarterback's potential. The moment Zach Wilson was drafted, the New York Jets and their fans pinned their hopes on him. The Jets had been desperate for a franchise quarterback since the days of Joe Namath, and Wilson seemed like the perfect candidate to fill that void. From the moment he donned the green and white uniform, the hype surrounding him was immense. Wilson wasn't just expected to be good, he was expected to be great. Jets fans had suffered through years of mediocrity and disappointment, and they believed that Wilson was the savior who could finally bring the franchise back to prominence. The media hype surrounding Wilson was equally intense. Analysts across the board praised his arm strength, his ability to make off-platform throws, and his potential to become one of the league's elite quarterbacks. Comparisons to NFL legends like John Elway and Joe Namath started to surface. The pressure on Wilson was unlike anything he had experienced at BYU. New York is one of the most demanding markets in professional sports, and the expectations placed on Wilson were sky-high. Every throw, every decision, and every game would be scrutinized by the fans and media alike. Despite the immense pressure, Wilson remained calm and confident. He embraced the role of being the face of the franchise, understanding that the Jets were counting on him to lead them out of the NFL's basement. The team's history of quarterback failures loomed large, with names like Mark Sanchez and Sam Darnold serving as cautionary tales. But Wilson was different, or so everyone thought. His college success had set him apart from other prospects, and the Jets believed that with the right development, Wilson could turn things around. But the reality of playing in the NFL is far more complex than just talent. As the 2021 season approached, Jets fans eagerly awaited Wilson's debut. The excitement was palpable. There was a genuine belief that Wilson could finally be the one to bring stability to the quarterback position. The franchise had cycled through countless quarterbacks over the years, each failing to deliver the consistency needed to compete at the highest level. But Wilson, with his impressive college resume and undeniable physical gifts, seemed like the real deal. The Jets front office had placed their trust in him, and now it was time for him to deliver. The comparisons to Namath added to the pressure. Namath, who led the Jets to their only Super Bowl win in 1969, remained a legendary figure in New York sports. Wilson was being heralded as the quarterback who could follow in Namath's footsteps and return the Jets to glory. It was a lofty expectation for any rookie, especially one stepping into a team that had been struggling for years. But Wilson welcomed the challenge, determined to prove that he was the right man for the job. The fans were ready to believe, and Wilson seemed ready to deliver. But with high expectations comes the potential for disappointment. Wilson's path to becoming a franchise quarterback wouldn't be easy. The NFL is unforgiving, especially for young quarterbacks, and Wilson was about to face challenges he had never encountered before. The Jets had placed the future of their franchise in his hands, and as the season began, the weight of those expectations would start to show. Zach Wilson's rookie season got off to a rocky start, and the early signs were not encouraging. In his very first home game, Wilson threw 4 interceptions against the New England Patriots, a disastrous performance that left fans and analysts questioning whether the Jets had made the right choice. The speed of the NFL game was clearly overwhelming for the rookie, and his decision-making under pressure was suspect. Wilson, who had looked so poised at BYU, now seemed rattled by the complexity of NFL defenses. His struggles to read coverages and adjust to the faster pace of the professional game became glaringly obvious. The interceptions piled up, and with each one, the confidence of both Wilson and the Jets fanbase took a hit. He finished his rookie season with 9 touchdowns and 11 interceptions, a far cry from the dominance he had shown in college. Wilson's mechanics also appeared to regress. His footwork was inconsistent, and he often forced throws into tight windows that resulted in turnovers. The mistakes were piling up, and it was clear that Wilson had a long way to go before he could become the franchise quarterback the Jets had hoped for. But even with the struggles, there were flashes of brilliance. Despite the turnovers, Wilson showed moments of promise that kept fans holding on to hope. His arm strength was undeniable, and when given time in the pocket, he could make throws that few quarterbacks in the league could. There were times when he displayed the potential that had made him a top draft pick, connecting on deep throws and making plays outside of the pocket. But those moments were too few and far between. Consistency was the biggest issue, and as the losses piled up, Wilson's confidence seemed to waver. The Jets finished Wilson's rookie season with a 3-10 record in the games he started. It was a tough year, not just for Wilson, but for the entire organization. The offensive line struggled to protect him, and the lack of playmakers around him made it difficult for Wilson to develop any rhythm. Injuries also played a role, as Wilson missed several games due to a knee injury. The Jets had hoped that Wilson would be able to elevate the team, but instead, the season exposed just how far the franchise had to go to build a competitive roster around him. Wilson's rookie struggles weren't entirely unexpected. Many young quarterbacks experience growing pains in their first year, especially when playing on a team with as many holes as the Jets. But the severity of Wilson's struggles raised concerns about whether he was truly ready to lead the team. His decision-making under pressure was questionable, and his tendency to hold on to the ball too long resulted in numerous sacks. The mistakes were piling up, and while the potential was there, it was becoming clear that Wilson had a long road ahead of him. As the 2021 season came to a close, the Jets were left with more questions than answers about their young quarterback. Was Wilson simply going through the typical rookie struggles, or were there deeper issues at play? The flashes of brilliance were encouraging, but the inconsistency was concerning. The Jets' coaching staff knew they had to find a way to help Wilson develop, both mentally and physically, if he was going to succeed in the NFL. The pressure on Wilson was immense, and his ability to handle it would determine the future of the franchise. Despite the rocky start, there was still a sense of optimism around Wilson. He had the tools to be a great quarterback, but he needed time to develop. The Jets' front office remained confident that with the right coaching and better protection from the offensive line, Wilson could turn things around in his second season. But the expectations remained high. The Jets hadn't invested the second overall pick in Wilson for him to simply be average. They needed him to be the savior they had been searching for. As Wilson headed into his second season, the pressure was on to show improvement. Zach Wilson's struggles as a rookie were not entirely his fault. From the moment he stepped onto the field, he faced significant challenges beyond his control. One of the most glaring issues was the New York Jets' weak offensive line. Wilson was often under duress, barely having time to scan the field before the pocket collapsed. The lack of protection not only led to numerous sacks but also forced Wilson into hurried throws, which contributed to his high number of interceptions. A young quarterback needs time to develop, but Wilson rarely had that luxury. Another major factor that hindered Wilson's development was the lack of reliable playmakers. While most successful young quarterbacks have a go-to receiver or an established running game to lean on, Wilson had neither. The Jets' receiving core was inconsistent at best, and injuries plagued the team throughout the season. Without dependable weapons, Wilson was forced to carry the offense on his shoulders, an impossible task for any rookie, especially one still adjusting to the speed and complexity of the NFL. The pressure on him to perform was immense, and the tools around him were simply not up to par. The coaching situation also added to the complexity of Wilson's struggles. First-year head coach Robert Saleh was still finding his footing in the NFL, and offensive coordinator Mike LaFleur, while innovative, faced his own learning curve. The Jets' play calling often lacked creativity, making it difficult for Wilson to find any rhythm. The offensive scheme, which required precise timing and quick decision-making, wasn't suited to a young quarterback still learning the intricacies of the pro game. As a result, Wilson struggled to execute, and the Jets' offense frequently stalled. The Jets have long had a reputation for failing to develop quarterbacks. From Mark Sanchez to Sam Darnold, the franchise has cycled through numerous young signal callers, each failing to reach their potential. Wilson was expected to break that cycle, but the environment in New York made it difficult for any quarterback to succeed. The pressure to turn the franchise around, combined with the instability on the offensive side of the ball, created a toxic situation for Wilson. It's no wonder he struggled to find his footing. If you're seeing how all these factors played against Wilson, go ahead and hit that like button to show your support for more deep dives like this. By mid-season, it was clear that Wilson was struggling to adapt to the NFL game. His footwork in the pocket was erratic, and his decision-making under pressure was questionable. But it's important to remember that much of his failure was due to the chaotic environment around him. The Jets' offensive line ranked near the bottom of the league in pass protection, and the constant pressure forced Wilson into making hasty, ill-advised throws. Without the time to properly go through his reads, he was often left to rely on instinct, which led to costly turnovers. Despite the struggles, there were occasional moments where Wilson's talent flashed. He made several highlight reel throws that showcased his arm strength and athleticism. However, those moments were fleeting, often overshadowed by the Jets' inability to protect him or provide him with consistent playmakers. The constant pressure from defenses, combined with the weight of being the face of the franchise, made it difficult for Wilson to progress. But if you've been enjoying this breakdown of Wilson's challenges, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on more stories like this one. As the season wore on, Wilson's confidence began to take a hit. It's hard for any quarterback to perform when the offensive line is crumbling, but for a rookie, it can be devastating. The Jets' inability to create a stable environment for Wilson hindered his growth, and by the end of the season, the toll was evident. He finished the year with more interceptions than touchdowns, and while some of that was on him, a large part of it was due to the team's systemic issues. The Jets, once again, had failed to provide a young quarterback with the tools needed to succeed. The constant turnover within the organization didn't help matters either. The Jets had a revolving door of offensive coordinators and head coaches in recent years, and that instability only added to Wilson's difficulties. Developing as a quarterback requires continuity in coaching and scheme, but Wilson was forced to learn a complex offense on the fly, without the benefit of seasoned veterans to guide him. The lack of leadership in the locker room and on the field only deepened the hole Wilson found himself in. It's hard to grow in chaos, and for Wilson, chaos was the only constant. By the end of his rookie season, the optimism surrounding Wilson had all but faded. The same organization that had hailed him as their savior just months earlier was now wondering if he was the right fit for the job. While there was still hope that Wilson could turn things around, the combination of a weak offensive line, lack of playmakers, and questionable coaching decisions left many doubting whether the Jets could properly develop him. The talent was still there, but the environment around him seemed destined to stifle any chance of success. As Zach Wilson entered his second season with the Jets in 2022, there was a renewed sense of optimism. Despite his rookie struggles, the Jets' coaching staff believed that with a full offseason to prepare and more experience under his belt, Wilson could take a significant leap forward. The team had invested in improving the offensive line and added some new playmakers, including wide receiver Garrett Wilson, a first-round draft pick. The hope was that Wilson would finally have the support he needed to thrive in the NFL. The Jets' front office had high expectations for Wilson to lead the team to a winning season. The season started on a promising note. Wilson looked more composed in the pocket, and his decision-making seemed to improve, albeit gradually. By mid-season, the Jets were sitting at an impressive 6-3 record, and Wilson had shown flashes of the potential that made him the second overall pick. His arm strength was still his most valuable asset, and when given time, he could make throws that very few quarterbacks in the league could replicate. The Jets were winning, and Wilson appeared to be turning the corner. But underneath the surface, the same issues that plagued him as a rookie still lingered. One of the main areas of concern was Wilson's inability to consistently read defenses. Despite the positive moments, he still struggled to diagnose coverages quickly, often locking onto his first read and missing open receivers. This limitation led to several missed opportunities in key games, where the Jets could have extended their lead or made critical plays. Wilson's tendency to rely on his arm strength to bail him out of tough situations became both a blessing and a curse. While he made some incredible plays, he also forced passes into tight windows, leading to unnecessary turnovers. Another area where Wilson's game needed improvement was his pocket awareness. Too often, he seemed unaware of the pressure collapsing around him, leading to unnecessary sacks. Rather than stepping up in the pocket or throwing the ball away, Wilson would hold on to it for too long, resulting in lost yardage or worse, turnovers. The Jets coaching staff worked with him on this aspect of his game, but the progress was slow. It was clear that Wilson had the raw talent to succeed, but the mental aspects of playing quarterback in the NFL were still a significant hurdle for him to overcome. Despite these challenges, there were games where Wilson showed clear progress. In a Week 8 matchup against the Buffalo Bills, Wilson played one of his best games as a pro, throwing for 254 yards and 2 touchdowns with no interceptions. He looked confident, made quick decisions, and spread the ball around to multiple receivers. This performance gave the Jets coaching staff hope that Wilson was finally starting to put the pieces together. However, the inconsistency that had defined his rookie season continued to rear its head in the weeks that followed. As the season progressed, Wilson's struggles became more pronounced. While the Jets had an impressive record, much of their success was attributed to their defense and running game rather than Wilson's play. His inability to consistently lead the offense became a concern. In several games, Wilson failed to convert on critical third downs, and his completion percentage remained one of the lowest in the league. The flashes of brilliance were still there, but the Jets needed more from their young quarterback if they were going to make a serious playoff push. By the time the Jets hit the midpoint of the season, doubts about Wilson's ability to lead the team long-term began to resurface. His stats, while slightly improved from his rookie year, were still below the expectations of a franchise quarterback. He continued to struggle with accuracy, completing just 55% of his passes through 9 games. For a team with playoff aspirations, Wilson's lack of development was becoming a serious concern. The Jets' defense was playing at a high level, but the offense, led by Wilson, was holding them back from reaching their full potential. The Jets' coaching staff remained patient, knowing that young quarterbacks often take time to develop. But the window for Wilson to prove himself was beginning to close. He had shown improvement in certain areas, but the overall inconsistency in his play was undeniable. The Jets were in the playoff hunt, but if Wilson couldn't elevate his game, the team would be forced to make some tough decisions. As the season entered its second half, Wilson's performance would be under the microscope, and the pressure to deliver would only intensify. Heading into the final stretch of the season, it was clear that Zach Wilson was at a crossroads. He had shown just enough promise to keep hope alive, but not enough to silence the critics. The Jets fan base, always passionate and demanding, was growing impatient. Wilson's future as the face of the franchise was still uncertain, and the next few games would determine whether he could solidify his position or if the team would have to consider other options. With the playoffs in sight, the time for Wilson to step up was now. The turning point in Zach Wilson's second season came in Week 11 against the New England Patriots. It was a game that would ultimately define his year, and possibly his career with the Jets. In one of the worst performances of his young career, Wilson completed only 9 of 32 passes for a mere 77 yards. The Jets' offense was stagnant, and Wilson's inability to move the ball downfield was painfully evident. The team managed just 2 total yards of offense in the second half, and the frustration was palpable. Wilson's struggles to read defenses and make quick decisions were on full display. The loss to the Patriots was a disaster, but it wasn't just Wilson's performance that made headlines, it was what happened after the game. When asked if he felt he had let the defense down, Wilson responded with a curt no, deflecting responsibility for the team's offensive failures. This lack of accountability struck a nerve within the organization and the locker room. His teammates, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, were visibly frustrated with his response. The Jets' defense had played exceptionally well, but Wilson's inability to lead the offense had cost them the game. Wilson's refusal to take responsibility for the team's struggles was the final straw. The following week, head coach Robert Saleh made the difficult decision to bench Wilson in favor of backup quarterback Mike White. It was a stunning move, but one that seemed necessary to restore order within the team. Wilson's benching was not just about his poor performance, it was about his lack of leadership and maturity. For a young quarterback, those qualities are just as important as physical talent, and Wilson had failed to demonstrate them. The fallout from Wilson's benching was immediate. Jets fans, who had been growing increasingly frustrated with his play, welcomed the change. Mike White, though less talented than Wilson, brought a sense of stability to the offense. In his first game as the starter, White threw for over 300 yards and led the Jets to a decisive victory. The contrast between White's performance and Wilson's struggles was stark, and it became clear that the Jets were a better team without their former second overall pick under center. For Wilson, the benching was a humbling experience. After being hailed as the savior of the franchise, he now found himself on the sidelines, watching another quarterback lead the team. His confidence, already shaken by his poor play, took another hit. The media was relentless in its criticism, and the once optimistic fan base had turned on him. Wilson had gone from being the face of the franchise to being an afterthought, all in the span of a few weeks. The pressure to win in New York had proven too much, and Wilson was paying the price. While Wilson remained on the bench, the Jets continued to win games with Mike White at the helm. The offense looked more efficient, and the players rallied around White in a way they hadn't with Wilson. It became increasingly clear that the team had lost faith in Wilson as their leader. His benching was not just a temporary move, it was a signal that the organization was beginning to reconsider his role in their future plans. The Jets were still in the playoff hunt, but Wilson's role in the team's success was shrinking by the day. The decision to bench Wilson was not made lightly. The Jets' coaching staff knew that it would have long-term implications for his development and confidence. But they also knew that the team couldn't afford to wait any longer for Wilson to figure things out. The playoffs were within reach, and the Jets needed a quarterback who could lead them there. For now, that quarterback was Mike White. The future of Zach Wilson, on the other hand, was looking more uncertain than ever. Wilson's benching also raised questions about the Jets' ability to develop quarterbacks. Was Wilson's failure a reflection of his own shortcomings, or was it another example of the Jets mishandling a young signal caller? The team had a history of struggling to develop quarterbacks, and Wilson seemed to be the latest in a long line of failed experiments. The franchise had invested so much in him, but now, just 2 years into his career, they were left wondering if it was time to move on. The writing was on the wall. Wilson's days as the Jets' starting quarterback were numbered. Despite the challenges, Wilson remained determined to work his way back into the starting role. He took responsibility for his actions and vowed to improve. But the reality was that his benching had fundamentally altered the trajectory of his career. His time as the face of the franchise was over, and the Jets were already looking ahead to their next move. Whether or not Wilson could salvage his career in New York was an open question, but the odds were stacked against him. As the season neared its end, Wilson's future with the Jets appeared bleak. By the time the 2023 offseason arrived, the Jets had made it clear that they were moving in a new direction at quarterback. The team's pursuit of Aaron Rodgers, one of the greatest quarterbacks in NFL history, sent a strong message to Zach Wilson and the fan base. The franchise was no longer willing to wait for Wilson to develop. The acquisition of Rodgers was seen as a game-changer for the Jets. Rodgers brought instant credibility, experience, and leadership to a team that had been searching for stability at quarterback for years. For Wilson, the arrival of Rodgers meant an immediate demotion to the backup role. It was a humbling moment for the former second overall pick, but Wilson embraced the change. Rather than sulking or demanding a trade, Wilson expressed his desire to learn from Rodgers. He understood that this was a chance to reset his career and gain valuable insight from one of the game's best. The Jets' coaching staff was encouraged by Wilson's response, seeing it as a sign of maturity and growth. Wilson's focus shifted from being the starter to being a student of the game. Rodgers, known for his cerebral approach to football, took Wilson under his wing. He mentored Wilson on the finer points of reading defenses, improving pocket awareness, and making better decisions under pressure. Wilson absorbed as much as he could, eager to apply the lessons Rodgers imparted. It was a unique opportunity for Wilson to learn from a quarterback who had won multiple MVPs and a Super Bowl. The hope was that by watching and learning from Rodgers, Wilson could eventually reignite his career and fulfill the potential that had once made him a top draft pick. However, fate had other plans. In the first game of the 2023 season, Aaron Rodgers suffered a devastating injury, tearing his Achilles just 4 plays into his Jets debut. Suddenly, Wilson was thrust back into the starting role, a position he had not expected to hold again so soon. The Jets had pinned their hopes on Rodgers, and now, those hopes rested once again on Wilson's shoulders. The pressure to perform was immense, but Wilson approached the situation with a new perspective. This was his chance at redemption, but he knew it wouldn't be easy. Wilson's return to the starting role was met with cautious optimism. He had spent months learning from Rodgers and was eager to prove that he could apply those lessons on the field. In his first few games back as the starter, Wilson showed signs of improvement. His decision-making was more deliberate, and he seemed more comfortable in the pocket. But the inconsistency that had plagued his career still lingered. While there were moments where Wilson looked like a competent NFL quarterback, there were still too many mistakes and missed opportunities. The Jets' offense, which had been built around Rodgers, struggled to find its rhythm with Wilson at the helm. While Wilson's play had improved, it wasn't enough to elevate the team to the level they had envisioned with Rodgers. The Jets were competitive in games, but they weren't winning consistently. Wilson's limitations were still apparent, and the team's playoff hopes began to fade as the losses mounted. Despite his best efforts, Wilson couldn't shake the narrative that he wasn't the long-term answer for the Jets at quarterback. As the season progressed, the Jets' coaching staff began to rotate Wilson in and out of the starting lineup, searching for answers. The once promising quarterback who had been hailed as the future of the franchise was now fighting just to keep his spot on the roster. Wilson's relationship with the team remained professional, but it was clear that the organization had lost faith in him as their starter. The Jets were looking ahead to the future, and Wilson's role in that future was uncertain at best. By the end of the season, it was clear that Zach Wilson's time with the Jets was coming to an end. While he had shown improvement and a willingness to learn, the gap between his potential and his performance was still too wide. The team's decision to pursue Aaron Rodgers had signaled the beginning of the end for Wilson, and despite his efforts to make the most of his second chance, it wasn't enough. The Jets were ready to move on, and Wilson was left to contemplate what the future held for him. By the time the 2023 season came to a close, the writing was on the wall for Zach Wilson's career with the New York Jets. His struggles had persisted over 2 tumultuous seasons, and even though he had embraced his role as a backup and shown some improvement, it wasn't enough to convince the organization that he was their long-term solution at quarterback. The Jets had invested heavily in Aaron Rodgers and were already looking to the future, and that future no longer included Wilson as the face of the franchise. The optimism that once surrounded Wilson had evaporated. The final blow came when Wilson suffered a concussion late in the season. After being benched, returning as a starter, and then struggling once again, his health became a concern. The concussion not only sidelined him for the remainder of the season but also seemed to symbolize the end of his journey with the Jets. The team was already leaning towards moving on from him, and this latest setback made it clear that Wilson's time in New York was over. For the Jets, it was the conclusion of yet another failed attempt to develop a franchise quarterback. The decision to part ways with Wilson wasn't an easy one for the organization. The Jets had selected him with the 2nd overall pick in the 2021 NFL Draft, hoping he would be the savior who could finally lead them back to the playoffs. They had invested millions of dollars and countless hours in his development, but after 3 seasons, the results simply weren't there. Wilson's talent was never in question, but the combination of poor decision-making, inconsistency, and a lack of leadership had left the Jets with little choice but to move on. For Wilson, it was a harsh reality to face. Just a few years earlier, he had been one of the most highly touted quarterbacks coming out of college, with analysts projecting him as the future of the Jets. Now, he was looking at a future in the NFL that was uncertain at best. His reputation had taken a serious hit, and while there was still hope that he could find success elsewhere, his career with the Jets had officially come to a disappointing end. The team would now look to rebuild once again, while Wilson's future in the league remained in doubt. Wilson's departure from the Jets marked the end of one of the most overhyped experiments in recent NFL history. The hype around him when he was drafted was immense, and for a while, it seemed as though he could be the player to finally change the fortunes of the long-struggling franchise. But like so many quarterbacks before him, Wilson found himself overwhelmed by the pressure of playing in New York and the challenges of developing in a chaotic environment. In the end, the Jets and Wilson simply weren't the right fit for each other. Despite the disappointment, Wilson's story isn't over. There's still a chance that he could revive his career with another team, either as a backup or potentially as a starter in the right system. He has the physical tools to succeed, and with more experience and the right coaching, he might be able to turn things around. But for now, his time with the Jets will be remembered as one of unfulfilled promise and missed opportunities. The team, once so hopeful that Wilson would be their savior, was now left to pick up the pieces and move forward without him. As the Jets moved on from Wilson, they were left to reflect on yet another quarterback experiment gone wrong. The franchise had spent decades searching for stability at the position, and Wilson had been their latest attempt. His career with the Jets may have ended in disappointment, but for the team and its fans, the search for a franchise quarterback continues. Wilson's story, while a cautionary tale, serves as a reminder of just how difficult it is to succeed in the NFL, especially in New York. Zach Wilson's journey with the New York Jets began with immense promise but ultimately ended in disappointment. From his college success at BYU to being drafted as the second overall pick, the expectations were sky high. The Jets, desperate for a franchise quarterback, had pinned their hopes on Wilson to lead them out of decades of mediocrity. But despite the flashes of brilliance, Wilson was unable to live up to the hype. His struggles with decision-making, inconsistency, and leadership ultimately led to his downfall. Wilson's story is a cautionary tale for young quarterbacks entering the NFL. Talent alone is not enough to succeed at the highest level. Mental toughness, preparation, and adaptability are just as important. The pressure of playing in New York, combined with the instability within the Jets organization, created a difficult environment for Wilson to thrive. While his physical tools were undeniable, the challenges he faced both on and off the field proved to be too much. The Jets, once again, were left searching for answers at the quarterback position. So, what do you think? Was Zach Wilson truly the overhyped savior who couldn't deliver, or do you think there's still hope for him in the NFL? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've enjoyed this deep dive into Wilson's career, don't forget to like this video. Your support helps us bring you more in-depth looks at the NFL's biggest stories and players. And, of course, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more NFL deep dives and analysis. We've got plenty more stories to uncover, from the rise and fall of NFL stars to the teams that changed the game forever. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.